Okay, so for, I think, a lot of React developers listening, Next.js has become just, well, almost synonymous with building modern web apps.
Right. Absolutely. It's definitely earned its place. Features like file-based routing, SSR, static generation, it's been the standard for a while.
It really has the go-to.
But, as it's grown, it's also gotten significantly more complex. You look at things like the app router, server components, middleware, streaming APIs.
Powerful stuff, for sure.
Immensely powerful, yes, but they've also made Next.js much more opinionated and maybe less predictable for some.
Huh.
We've definitely seen criticisms popping up about vendor lock-in, the sheer pace of change.
Yeah.
It can feel a bit overwhelming.
Yeah, like you're constantly trying to keep up. So if you're listening and nodding along thinking, okay, I love React, but maybe it's time to look around, then you are absolutely in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission today in this deep dive is really to cut through that noise. We're going to explore 5 top alternatives to Next.js.
Yeah, look at what they offer, where they really shine.
Exactly. And crucially, when one might actually be a better fit for your project than sticking with Next.js. It's all about finding the right tool for your job.
Definitely. And we'll be looking at Remix, Astro, TanStack Start, Vike, and also the combination of Vite plus React Router.
A good range.
A very good range. They all work with React, obviously, but their philosophies, their approaches, they vary quite a bit. Gives you real choice.
Okay, fantastic. Let's kick things off with Remix then. This one feels like a really strong contender, right? Especially if you like React, but maybe you're questioning Next.js's current direction.
It really is. And its core idea, I think, is super interesting. It aims to respect how the web works.
How so? What does that mean in practice?
Well, it leans heavily on native browser features. Things like HTML forms, standard HTTP requests, caching headers. It doesn't try to abstract those away quite as much.
Almost like getting back to basics, but with React.
Kind of, yeah. It's file-based routing is a good example. It's not just mapping files to pages. Each route can define a loader function.
For data fetching.
Exactly. For server-side data fetching. And an action function for mutations, like when you submit a form. And the key thing is, these run on the server, scope to that route.
Okay, so you might not need a separate API layer just for your front-end data.
Often you don't. And SSR is the default. Data from the loader gets injected, hydrated client-side. It's pretty seamless. Avoid some of those client-side fetch waterfalls or needing suspense just for initial data.
In caching, how does that work?
It uses standard HTTP caching headers, cache control, e-tags. You control it directly in your server code, very web native.
That sounds really solid, very principled. But there have to be trade-offs, right? Where might Remix not be the best fit?
Yeah, definitely. The main one is probably the ecosystem size. It's smaller than Next.js.
Meaning fewer plugins, integrations, maybe tutorials.
Exactly. You might find yourself building more things from scratch. And also that webway approach, while powerful, it can feel like a bit more work sometimes if you're used to higher level abstractions that hide those details.
Okay, so how does that translate day to day? The developer experience, does it feel like a chore or...
Generally, I think developers find it quite refreshing. That file-based routing makes routes really self-contained. It helps a lot with avoiding things like prop drilling.
Oh, that's a big one. Passing props down multiple levels.
Right. With Remix, your loader fetches the data server side, say for a blog post, and your component just gets it. Clean. But, and this is important, you still have full control over standard React client-side stuff, use state, effects for UI interactions. That all works just like you'd expect.
So it's not like you lose React's client-side power.
Not at all.
Okay, so summing up Remix. Who is this really for, if you're listening?
I'd say Remix is for you if you want a full-stack React framework. You value strong SSR and data handling, you prefer fewer abstractions, and you're building maybe a more complex web app where you want good defaults, but also that fine-grained control.
Makes sense. All right, so Remix gets us closer to web fundamentals. But what if your main goal is just raw speed, especially for content? That brings us to Astro.
Ah, Astro. Yes.
Now, we should clarify, right? Astro isn't just a React framework.
Correct. It integrates really well with React, but it's framework agnostic. But yes, where it truly shines is on content-heavy sites. Blogs, marketing pages, documentation, sites where performance is absolutely key.
And its big selling point is that island architecture.
Exactly. That's the magic. It renders everything as static HTML by default, just plain HTML.
Okay.
And then only the interactive parts, the islands, get hydrated with JavaScript. Only the bits that actually need to be interactive.
Right. So the user sees content almost instantly and the JavaScript loads later only where necessary.
Precisely. The result is tiny JavaScript bundles and incredibly fast page loads. It's quite remarkable for perceived performance.
So key features would be that partial hydration.
Partial hydration, definitely.
Yeah.
Being framework agnostic, mix, React, Vue, Svelte, whatever, in one project.
Wow. Okay.
And it has really great built-in support for Markdown and MDX. You can embed React components right inside your Markdown content. Super smooth authoring.
And it handles dynamic stuff too now, right? Not just static.
Yes. It started mainly static, but it now supports SSR and hybrid rendering too for pages that need it.
So where might Astro not be the best choice? What are the limitations?
Well, because its default is static output, if you're building something highly interactive like a complex dashboard or a full-blown single-page application.
Like Gmail or something.
Yeah, something like that. Astro might feel a bit limiting. It can do it, but it's not its primary focus. Also, its SSR support, while capable, is newer and maybe not as battle-tested for really complex dynamic scenarios compared to Remix or Next.js.
Gotcha. And the developer experience. How does it feel to build with Astro?
It feels very HTML first. You write your HTML, your CSS, and then you drop in React components or components from other frameworks where you need that interactivity. You often use a directive like client.load to tell Astro how and when to load the component's JavaScript.
So Astro kind of stays out of the way unless you explicitly tell it to hydrate something.
Pretty much. It lets you control the interactivity boundary very clearly.
Okay, so Astro's ideal use case then.
Yeah.
Who should be reaching for this?
If your project is primarily content-focused, blog, docs, a marketing site, and speed is your absolute top priority, Astro is fantastic. You get that HTML-first experience, you ship minimal JavaScript by default, and you can still sprinkle in React where needed.
Excellent. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about TanStack Start. This one's newer, right? From the team behind TanStack Query and other popular libraries.
That's right. It's newer, and it comes from a team with a really strong reputation in the React ecosystem, especially around data management and type safety.
And their goal is simpler, type-safe apps.
Yeah, they want to simplify building fast, type-safe React apps, leveraging the tools people often already use and trust, like TanStack Query, TanStack Router, etc.
So what are its core features? What does it bring to the table?
It offers solid SSR and streaming support out of the box, which is great for performance and SEO. And crucially, given the TanStack background, it has strong support for server functions and API routes.
Meaning logic that runs only on the server.
Exactly. For data fetching, mutations, keeping sensitive logic off the client. Very clean separation.
That focus on type safety and integrating those familiar TanStack tools sounds really appealing. But you said it's newer. What's the main sort of caution there?
Well, yeah, the main drawback currently is that it's still in beta.
Ah. Right.
So features might change, APIs could evolve, and the documentation, while getting better, might not be as complete as more established frameworks. If you need absolute stability today for a critical project, that's something to consider.
Right. Makes sense. How does it actually feel to develop with it? Does it feel close to just plain React?
It really does. The developer experience aims for minimal framework boilerplate. Routing is file-based, similar to others, but the key is it's fully typed using TanStack Router.
Fully typed routing. That sounds nice.
It's fantastic. Navigation, route params, search params, data loading, it's all type-safe end-to-end. If you define a loader that uses a server function, the types flow all the way through to your component.
So fewer runtime errors, more confidence.
A lot more confidence. Logic lives where it should, server or client, and it's all strongly typed without relying on, framework magic.
Okay, so where does TanStack Start fit best? When should you consider it?
If you're building a data-heavy application, maybe something complex, and you really value type safety, sophisticated cache management, and fine-grained control over data fetching, TanStack Start is very compelling. You accept the beta status, but gain the power and reliability of the TanStack ecosystem.
Interesting. A strong contender, especially if you're already using TanStack libraries.
Definitely one to watch.
All right, next up, Vike. This used to be called Vite, right?
That's the one. It's a lightweight meta framework built on Vite.
And its main characteristic is being unopinionated.
Extremely unopinionated. That's its whole philosophy. It gives you, the developer, full control over everything. Routing, server-side rendering, static site generation.
Full control sounds good, but also maybe a bit daunting. What does that look like in practice?
Well, take routing. It uses file conventions like plus page.tsx for the page component, or plus page.server.ts for server-side logic. But unlike others, it doesn't force a strict folder structure. You can organize your project however you like.
Oh, interesting. So more flexibility in project structure.
Total flexibility.
Yeah.
And you get really granular control over rendering. You decide per route if it's SSG or SSR. Both are first-class citizens, and you configure exactly how they work. Vike basically provides the core building blocks.
The primitives.
Exactly, the primitives. But you bring your own solutions for data fetching, caching, state management, authentication, even layouts. It doesn't prescribe those.
Okay, so it's definitely not holding your hand.
Uh-huh.
What are the main challenges or trade-offs with that approach?
The biggest one is probably the lack of a built-in data layer. Unlike Remix's loader, Vike doesn't give you a system for data loading out of the box.
So you have to roll your own fetching, caching, revalidation.
Entirely.
Yeah.
Which adds setup time and requires you to have good patterns for that already. And related to that, it probably has a higher barrier to entry.
Because it assumes you know more.
Yeah, it assumes you're comfortable with SSR concepts, routing, general app architecture. There aren't many pre-configured flows or templates, so setting it initially can feel more complex if you want something that just works immediately.
So given that level of control, what's the dev experience like? Is it liberating or just complicated?
For the right developer, it's liberating. You use functions like onBeforeRender in your plus page.server.ts files to explicitly handle server logic and data. Nothing is hidden.
So very explicit. No magic.
Zero magic. Vike is really for developers who want that absolute control without compromise, and they're comfortable connecting the dots themselves. It's more like a toolkit than a framework telling you how to build your app.
Okay, so who is Vike really for then?
Vike is for you if you want total granular control over every single piece, routing, rendering, data, everything, and you don't want framework opinions dictating how you do it. Think of it as a powerful set of tools that integrates beautifully with Vite, perfect if you want to architect your solution from the ground up.
Got it. A tool for the architects among us. All right, finally, let's discuss a combination that maybe some people are sleeping on. Just using Vite directly with React Router.
Yes. This isn't a full framework, obviously, but it's a really potent and modern setup.
Why is it powerful? What do you get?
Well, first, you get Vite, which means incredibly fast dev server startup, lightning fast hot module replacement.
That fast feedback loop.
Exactly. Plus, great built-in support for TypeScript, JSX, and efficient code splitting. It's just a fantastic build tool.
Okay, so the tooling is great. What about the React side?
That's where React Router comes in, especially since version 6.4, because now React Router supports route-level loader functions.
Loaders, like in Remix.
Very similar. You can define functions that fetch data before your row component renders. This gives you a lot of the data loading capabilities you find in full-stack frameworks, but without needing the whole framework.
Wow, okay. That sounds like a big deal for building more complex SBAs.
It really is. It brings data fetching right alongside your route definitions.
So what's the catch? What's the main trade-off here compared to a framework?
The biggest difference is probably the lack of file-based routing. You have to define all your routes manually in code.
Using something like Query Browser Router.
Exactly. Which is super flexible, gives you explicit control, but yeah, it's more verbose than just creating files in a specific folder structure, especially if you have tons of routes.
Okay. And how does that feel to work with day-to-day, manually defining routes using the loaders?
It feels quite clean, actually. React routers use loader data. Hook makes accessing that prefetched data really straightforward and declarative within your components. You define your routes and loaders together, often in one central file, so the logic is easy to follow.
So it's explicit, maybe less magic than file-based routing sometimes feels.
Precisely. You have very clear control over your app's structure and data flow without adopting a whole opinionated framework structure around it.
So when would you recommend this Vite plus React Router combo?
I think it's ideal if you're building a fast, lightweight client-side React app, particularly a single-page application or SPA. If you don't necessarily need or want the full-stack features or opinions of a larger framework, but you do want modern tooling, solid routing, and that route-level data loading capability, it's a fantastic choice.
Right. Keeping it focused on the client-side needs. Okay, that covers our 5 alternatives.
Yeah.
So bringing it all together, it sounds like the best choice really isn't one size fits all.
Not at all. It completely depends on your project, your team, what you value most. Is it raw speed? Is it type safety? Is it absolute control? Or maybe getting back to web fundamentals.
Each one has a different strength, a different philosophy.
Exactly. So maybe a quick recap to help people decide.
Yeah, let's do a quick best 4 summary.
Okay, so Remix. Best for complex full-stack apps needing strong SSR and smart built-in data handling using web standards. Good defaults, good control.
Right. Astro.
Astro. Best for content-heavy sites, blogs, docs, marketing where raw speed is king, HTML first, minimal JS by default, sprinkle in React.
TanStack Start.
TanStack Start. Best for data-heavy apps where type safety, caching, and precise fetch control are critical. Great if you like the TanStack ecosystem, keeping in mind it's still beta.
Vike.
Vike, best for those who want absolute granular control over everything routing. SSR, data with zero framework opinions. More of a toolkit.
And finally, Vite plus React Router.
Vite plus React Router, best for fast, lightweight client-side apps and SPAs needing modern tooling and robust routing with data loaders, but without full-stack framework overhead.
Perfect summary.
Yeah.
So, yeah, while Next.js is still, a huge player and a powerful framework,
Undeniably.
it's clearly not the only game in town anymore for React developers.
Yeah.
If you've felt some of those growing pains with Next.js, the rapid changes, the complexity, maybe concerns about lock-in, you're definitely not alone.
Mm-hmm.
And as we've seen today, there are some really compelling, often more specialized alternatives out there offering different paths forward.
There really are. And maybe a final thought to leave people with.
Yeah.
Something to mull over as you consider these options. Given this diversity and how fast web development changes, think about the long-term impact. How might aligning your project with a specific framework's core philosophy affect its future adaptability? And just as importantly, how might it affect the daily joy and productivity of your development team beyond just the feature list today?